Okay. Good evening. I'm going to read a story for the little boys tonight, and it's called Nelson Beats the Odds. It's written by Ronnie Sidney II, illustrated by Tracy Van Wagner. All right. Nelson was off to a rocky start at Bland Middle School. Mrs. Grokowski, Nelson's teacher, caught him playing with his friend Carlos during class. Mrs. Grokowski asked Nelson to move his desk to the front of the class, then to the back of the class, and eventually outside of the class. No matter where Nelson moved his desk, he found someone to talk to. Nelson was in big trouble, and all he could hear was his mother's voice yelling. Miss Grokowski said, "I've had enough of your antics, young man. I'm going to call your parents." All Nelson could hear in his head was his mother saying, "I sent you to school to learn, not play." Nelson's in trouble, y'all. Nelson would often become inattentive and disinterested in class. While Mrs. Grokowski stood at the board teaching, Nelson's mind wandered outside of the school walls into the la-la land. Nelson sat and daydreamed about playing professional basketball with his buddy Anthony. Nelson wants to be a basketball player. So that's what instead of him paying attention to his teacher, he's daydreaming. When Mrs. Grokowski asked Nelson to read what was on the board, he couldn't see it. So his father took him to see an eye doctor. When Nelson came to school the next day, he left his glasses in his book bag. "Where are your glasses?" "I forgot and left them at home." Nelson lied to Mrs. Grokowski because he thought his classmates would tease him for wearing glasses. Oh, he didn't wear his glasses to school. Okay. When Nelson went to hand in his work, Miss Grokowski said, "I can't read this chicken scratch," and put a big, fat, red F on it. Nelson felt embarrassed and mumbles. Nelson felt embarrassed and mumbles. "Maybe you need to learn how to read then." The class erupted in laughter. Mrs. Grokowski's face turned redder than a fire truck, and she screamed, "Go to the office now!" She mad. Mrs. Grokowski set up a meeting with Nelson's parents the next day and told them, "I suspect your son has ADHD and a learning disability. I would like to refer Nelson to our school psychologist to determine if he is eligible to receive a special education service." Nelson's parents refused to put him on medication, but they thought that special education would help help him reach his maximum ability. "There's nothing wrong with you, baby. You just need some extra help. It's not fair. I won't be in class with my friends, and everyone will think I'm slow. You're not slow. I've always told you that you were smart. Your dad and I just want the best for you, and the school thinks this program will help you." They had to put him in a special class. While Nelson was on the way to his special education class, Carlos asked, "Hey, Nelson, where are you going?" "I'm going to the bathroom." "Isn't the bathroom that way?" "I'm going to the other bathroom. See you later." Nelson sneaked to his special education class like a ninja. He didn't want anyone to know that he was in special ed because they would tease him. Look at Nelson hiding to get to class. He didn't want his friends to know. Although Nelson hated going to his special education classes, he really liked his teacher, Mrs. T. "Welcome, Nelson. And on her chalkboard, it says, if you can believe it, you can achieve it. Remember that. If you can believe it, you can achieve it. Miss T was there for Nelson at a time when he felt really small and needed someone to help make him feel really big. You can do it. Nelson began believing in himself and gained the confidence and skills he needed to push the boundaries to discover his potential and grow. He started raising his hand in class because that teacher made him feel good. He had confidence. He started answering questions. He paid attention. After 3 years in special education, Nelson's grades and organizational skills improved significantly. It was his last week in middle school, and Miss Johnson, the high school guidance counselor, came over to help students sign up for classes. Nelson and his best friends, Tamika and Carlos, signed up for the same classes and crossed their fingers, hoping they would be in a class together next year. I can't wait to get to high school and take classes with my friends. Uh-oh, he's going to high school now. He thinks he's going to be with his friends. A fresh start. On Nelson's first day at Bland High School, he was thrilled to be in class with Tamika and Carlos. See the picture? He's going to school now. But moments later, the loudspeaker sounded. Nelson was called out of class. His first thought was that he was in trouble. Nelson was relieved that he wasn't in trouble, but looked suspiciously at Mrs. Johnson as she handed him a new schedule. Nelson was taken out of the classes with his friends and placed back into special education. 3 special education classes? He thought he was going to normal classes. When Nelson got home, his mother saw him crying. What's wrong? Why did they put me back in special ed? You said I was smart. I hate that school, and I'm never going back. The next day, Nelson's parents met with Miss Johnson and said, my son came home crying yesterday and said you put him back in special education. We want our son out of those classes now. I'm so sorry. There must have been some mistake. I will take your son out of those classes immediately. But he will need to be placed in a developmental algebra. After school, Nelson hung with his cousin Jeremy. Bro, I'd hate to be in those stupid classes and start acting white like Tamika and Carlos. Nelson interrupted. You sound stupid. They aren't acting white. They're acting like they want to go to college and be successful. You don't understand, Jeremy. I need those classes to get into college. Jeremy nudged Nelson and replied, whatever, man. I don't need to go to college because I'm going to the NFL. Nelson shook his head and said, come on, man. Everyone knows that you can't make it into the NFL until you graduate high school and enroll in college. Oh, yeah? To college? Nelson was placed in Mr. Stevenson's developmental algebra class. Nelson became bored because the work was no longer challenging. Mr. Stevens sure is a know-it-all. Splat. Somebody throws some paper at Mr. Stevens. While Mr. Stevenson had his back turned, a spitball whizzed by his head and hit the board. Nelson and Jeremy, did either of you throw that spitball? No. No. Mr. Stevenson paused and shook his head. That's why neither of you are going to college. Gasp. Nelson and Jeremy looked at each other and gasped as if they had seen a ghost. They couldn't believe Mr. Stevenson would say such a thing. Nelson told himself that day that he would prove Mr. Stevenson wrong and go to college. Teachers are never supposed to tell a kid what they cannot do. It's not their job to tell a child what they cannot do. Nelson graduated high school and decided to go to college and become a social worker. He wanted to help kids reach their full potential. Nelson didn't have the grades to get into many universities, so he took classes at community college. Community college helped Nelson build the confidence and skills he needed to transfer into a university. So he went to community college first, and then he went to a university. In college, Nelson studied hard and graduated at the top of his class. When he walked across the stage to receive his university degree, he looked into the packed stand and saw his family, friends, and former teachers cheering for him. Nelson finally proved Mr. Stevenson wrong. He showed him and the world that he was smart and would succeed despite being placed in special education. And this is Nelson's speech. I stand here today because some very special people believed in me. First, I would like to thank my mom and dad for never giving up on me and supporting my dream to become a social worker. I want to thank the teachers who saw my potential and invested in me. Mrs. T, thank you for your positive energy and encouraging words. You left a lasting impression on my life and helped make my success story happen. The end. So in this story, we found out that, it's teachers are the most impressionable person that kids meet besides their parents. A teacher should never break a child down. A teacher is supposed to inspire a child to be the best that they can be. If you can achieve it, you can do it. If you can conceive it, you can achieve it. You can see it, you can touch it. Reach for the stars, children. The end. Good night until tomorrow.